This is early on in like 1983. I still didn't know what JNO, but that stood for John. I was, learning these little things as you go along. And he lived in a cabin right here. And this right here, if you look at these roads right there, and I drew those in this map so that you could get a better idea, because Jonestown Road doesn't curve like this anymore. So I drew how it goes straight. And a lot of the Craters lived around here, and there was a Crater Mill, which eventually became Burke's Mill. As when he died, it was sold to the Burke family. And the Ryan family had a store here. There was a Burke store over here. There was, these two families were kind of all over the place back then. And that's Darlestown. And so I noticed in a lot of the writings, they called the Crater Schoolhouse the Philadelphia Schoolhouse. And I thought, well, what is it? What was it? And basically what it was, it started out as the Crater Schoolhouse. But then when people wrote histories, they would write it as, like the history of New Philadelphia, in their book, calls it the Philadelphia Schoolhouse. But then a lot of people would write articles and put them on Ancestry.com saying, that's not right. So it's kind of like one of those things where my favorite saying with all this is, as far as I know. It started out as Crater Schoolhouse, then it became Philadelphia Schoolhouse, and then they built the church, which was never a school to anyone's knowledge. I've found nothing that says that church was ever a school. Now, if you follow this road right up here, and you'll come to Forsyth Country Club, there was a Hamburg school, which we'll get to here in a little bit. And then if you cross over Silas Creek and went up here, this is Peacehaven Road. And there were probably on this road, probably 2 or 3 schoolhouses at one time. But there was on some maps it's listed as the Burke Christian School. But I don't, Darla might be able to tell you, I don't know about that.
I think that Kettner's church may have met in that schoolhouse
before
they built their church.
And then when that guy who was doing the map, well, okay, the church people are over here, so it's Christian school.
Right.
But that's the only map that even listed as Christian school. So I don't really think that's what it was. And so, you move on. Okay, this is the rock wall. And we would come right through up here and ride our bikes and jump over this thing and go downhill and fell into the creek many times. Because you couldn't stop. It's a slope. It's straight downhill. And if you look, it's hard to notice, but there's more rocks right here. And then over here, there's some it looks like a little barn. I found one thing that said John Mark Rominger had a school in this house. Only one thing ever mentions, that was there. And it probably wasn't there for very long because he's got so much competition, But, here's a guy who's born, in like 1767. So it's pretty early when that school's going on there. And we'll move down the road. We're going down Jonestown Road now. This is the very first Pine Grove Moravian Methodist Church building, which was used as a school. It was not, this is not an 1859 picture. This was in the church. And so there was first picture I saw was a black and white picture. I thought, maybe, but then I saw this and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what this is. And the Pine Grove the school started in 1859, but they didn't put enough information in the picture when they had it. And inside the church, they'd taken all this information, got it out of where anybody could see it, and brought it into the history room, and it was piled up in there. Now, all these clothes I found in a box, and these are people who went to this church. And it's kind of funny because I picked these pants up, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I said, I cannot imagine being a child and having to wear something that felt like that.
Is it wool?
Yeah, and I said, and you can tell all these are handmade. They didn't go downtown and buy clothes. They all made their own clothes. And one of them had a tag on it, and it says it was worn by Rose Todd Jones. That was my great-grandfather's sister's daughter. So you find stuff, and then it's a good thing you've done genealogy, because you go, oh, I know who wore that.
Wow.
And it's just a coat that she wore.
Oh
And she probably wore that to church. I'm guessing that's not a school thing. But these kind of look like something someone would have worn in there. And this was the second building, which is still standing.
Oh.
And I went into that building about right before COVID hit. And that's where I found all these old books stacked up on a bookcase. And I was shocked that they were still even there. There was some neat stuff in there from the late 1800s, like a play, Clubbing Your Husband. But there was a spelling book, songs to sing, which that's a school book, and this one was the songs, and these weren't church songs, so it led me to think, okay, these are school books. These aren't from the church.
Where is that at now?
Johnstown Road.
Okay.
Right after you cross, if you're on Johnstown, turn on Johnstown off a country club, and right after you go over 40, it's on the right, about half a mile.
Oh my goodness.
Is this the building that was the scout hut? The
That-
Boy Scout hut?
That's to the right of it.
Oh, it's on the other side.
Yeah. This looked like scouts might have kept stuff in there, but I don't think they used it.
Okay.
I wouldn't have gone in there. It looked like a raccoon house. Where they put the floor, and you could tell somebody had done stuff there. There's an air conditioner in the window, but if you walk in those two doors, there's like a little hallway kind of thing, and then behind there it's full length, like the school, inside of the schoolhouse would be. And then that far left was like a book room. That's where the raccoons were coming up, and spending the winter.
Now, has this been put like on the historic register or anything? Is it?
Nope. No. It actually has, that tin roof was probably put on that thing 60, 70 years ago or longer. Those kind of roofs I've seen on houses built in the 30s, so that I know of.
Yeah.
I don't know when they started really doing that kind of a roof, but the building over here is a cinder block building, and that's where all the Boy Scouts would meet. And a lot of people I knew my age actually were in that Boy Scout troop. Tim White, and a lot of people lived on Randall. And speaking of that map, Randall actually at one time was Davis Avenue. From the Davis store that was on the corner where the firehouse is now. And I didn't have a clue back then there was a Davis store. You learn all these things start to just kind of fall in your lap as you're doing stuff. And it's just amazing. This is when that building was first built. This is what it looked like in the beginning. And this is how many people lived in that church that long ago, And now, 45 people. And it's a big, beautiful church now, but COVID just kind of, at 125, now it's turned to 45. they watch it on YouTube.
And what church is that again?
Pine Grove Methodist. And that's happening to a whole lot of churches, you know, that they just can't get people, you know, if they can sit at home and watch it on the big screen TV, why leave, you know, and some of them I can't blame. If you're young, get up. You know, it's not that hard, but, you know, I can't tell you what to do. But they would have, you know, and I'm pretty sure this is a family reunion, or the lady in the middle, it could be her 100th birthday party. And see, nobody wrote much on the back of these pictures. It was just in the church, and sitting there on a little easel, so you kind of knew it had something to do with the church. And then I saw original pictures of that building we were looking at, and it had one door, one window. But as time goes by, so when I went inside of it, it's a long cabin, like this. It's just been boarded on the outside. Okay, now, let's jump down the street to the Hamburg school I was talking about. There was an early picture, I think 1911, that Darla, I was reading that article.
Yeah.
And it's a very smaller building, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't look anything like this. But then I kept finding other articles that said 2 additions were made. This was done, that was done. As the more kids are popping in, they had to keep making this thing larger. And I'm like, okay, you know, there's all these other schools right down the road. You know, but this was closer to Winston. So are these people coming from that direction? This is right across the street, Plymouth Avenue, from Forsyth County Club. And so a lot of people probably were drifting away from Winston, because they really at that time had an itty-bitty log cabin school, no bigger than anything. And that school right now sits at the fairgrounds in the Yesterday Village. When you walk into the Yesterday Village on the left side, it's that first little cabin that you come to.
Okay.
And if you read Brownlee's book, they got into a big, you know, not an argument, but a debate. He put a picture in his book that shows the Salem Boys School, and he said it was the first school in Winston. And no. And so all these people, you know, I think this was one of them. I don't think she's here. Who's the lady? Not Heather Firmbach, but who's the one that works with her?
Michelle
Martha
McCullough.
Hartley,
Martha? No?
who was here last time.
No, There used to be, 15 years ago, they came and she did a speech.
Michelle McCullough.
Michelle.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle. And they got into it about, this is what happened, and they were able to find the house in downtown. It was still sitting there, boarded up, and that's when they decided to move it. And that was a good thing, you know. You can go see that now, you just go to the fairgrounds. Now, the Hamburg school, as time went on, I found more articles about that place than I would ever want. I mean, they just, you know, the Western Sentinel is where these things were printed. You know, one article, I think, in the late 20s in the Winston-Salem Journal was the only thing I found, and that's just 2 or 3 years away from South Fork School opening up, and bye, you know, that was the end of this. Because they actually split this school up from 1 through 6th grade, because as you can see, how many students. And then the other grades went to Louisville, which I was telling you. And I'm thinking, that's a really long way to go, you know, to go to school. But then I thought, well, my great aunt went from, you know, right in that neighborhood, all the way to Clemens boarding school. And I'm thinking, oh, she didn't ride a horse. So she's in a wagon, because there were no cars back then. And I'm thinking, You know, that's really a long, long way to go. And if you read John Reynolds, my granddad's house as they were getting ready to tear it down, I said, I'm going to go through that house and go digging for stuff. And that's when I found the Henry Freeze letters commemorating 50 years after that school had closed.
Wow.
And so he printed all that stuff and put it in the journal. So it's in our back journal. It's in the disc if you have that. Okay. This is also a picture of, I think this is it vertical? I think. We look at some of the pictures, they kind of, oh, no, this is high grade. Yeah, this is, we're still at high grade. So that school was, you know, a pretty good size. Okay. When I was going through my granddad's house, it's a week away from being demolished, and I found this picture, and I thought, well, my aunt, my mother's sister, was the office manager, photographer, did all this stuff at Clemens Courage. And I found, you know, and I thought, well, that's my grandmother right there. That's my maternal grandmother. I don't know who any of these other people are. And so I went to the Clemens Courier, got out all their big books, looked at every single one from the 80s, because it would have been in the 80s. Pages ripped out, and now they've shut it down, and I don't even know where these things even are. I called Knoxville, and they go, we don't know. So I was hoping maybe they'd turn them over to the North Carolina room, but they didn't. Don't know where they went. So these are all people who went to Burke Grove School. Every single one, and this is the very last graduating class reunion. So, you know, it's rare you would see a picture like this anyway. But, you know, I'm just glad I found it and saved it from destruction.
And what year would that have been graduation from? What year? You think
Probably,
they graduated?
this would have probably been early 20s.
In the early to mid-20s, because he's going to tell you this, South Fork School kind of combined Hamburg, Burke
Yeah.
Road,
Yeah.
and
No, all
All
these
those,
things
yeah.
started getting all mixed up, you know.
kind of consolidated, yeah.
No, and what was it, Cedar Grove? They started mixing it in, and they just started throwing all these together. Okay, here's the original South Fork School. That pretty much took all these one-room schoolhouses and said, bye. They were gone.
Man.
When they built this on Country Club Road, that was all she wrote for one-room schoolhouses in that area. They were gone. And that's where I went 1 through 6. So I lived in there. Whoops. If you go all the way to, no, maybe it's smaller.
Oh, it's got a, Kathy, do you know how to put it back to the full screen?
It was, oh.
Yes.
Somehow it's gotten off of the full screen.
From
We're in big button. I can see it, but people in button.
Yeah.
Oh,
But 2 months ago, I was,
There we go, thank you.
I went to eat with my cousin and her husband. They're from the Pope, he's from the Pope family, and she's from my father's family. And they said, we've got some stuff on one-room schoolhouses that you might want to look at. You know, they didn't have a clue what I was looking at. They all went to Griffith High School. So, you know, well, that's 1923 and forward. I said, and it was never a one-room schoolhouse, but right across from Griffith, down this little road, said Pleasant Fork.
Pleasant what?
Pleasant Fork.
Four?
It's a fork. It's a Christian school, church. So any denomination. I've actually got when they wrote up who's going to do what and how and when, you know, they had a copy of that they typed out. You know, it's not the written copy, but saying all the rules and regulations and the stone at the front left-hand corner that says 1868 is when this was built. Now, if you walk straight ahead, there's a little circle around a big oak tree, and you go to the left, there's a couple of, you can tell there was something, a log structure. And as I read about this church and how it got started, there was some people in that neighborhood, officials and the popes and other families that were Moravians kind of ish, but didn't, I guess they didn't want to be Moravians, who knows. That they started the school and they built a brush arbor, which is basically just sticks and leaves to keep the sun off of you. I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound very comfortable. But you know, we walked over into those woods, and he said, yeah, he goes, the log school burned out. And this was before 1850. There were still 3 logs with burn marks on them laying there, you know. And I'm like, well, I mean, there's a little evidence that all that stuff they wrote is true. But they, when Forsyth County took over Stokes County land in 1850, this was a mess for churches that weren't active. By then, this church isn't even active, really. And so they taxed them. And of course, they're like, where are we going to come up with all this money? They gave them, out of the 40 acres of land they had, they gave the county the front 10 acres up on Clemensville Road in payment. And that lasted for about 30 or 40, 50 years. And then after a while, the county's like, no, you know, we want more, you know. And so there's 4 people who are paying the taxes every year on this land. And I'm like, you're, oh, yeah, okay. Half of them worked at Piedmont Airlines their whole lives. They, you know, I guess they can afford it, and good for them, you know, but I don't know what will eventually
Happen with those people.
come of this. The inside of the church is a wreck. Like 7, 8 years ago, when a big snowstorm came and blew the roof off, the whole inside was just watered down. There's a lot of damage on the inside, even though they've got it fixed, and it looks nice.
Where is that one? Where is that one?
Right across from Griffith Elementary School now is a road called Pleasant Fork Road. There's a fire station right there, and you can't miss it. There aren't that many roads right there, really. If you
Okay.
turn off of Silas Creek like you're heading, Peters Creek like you're heading out of town, and get on Clemensville, and there'll be a little traffic circle, go to the right, and then you'll see the road to your left. And it's boom. As soon as you turn down that road, you're there. Pretty easy to find. And there's a large graveyard. Yeah, it's pretty big. There's probably 500 or more people buried there. So the church has been going on for a long time. But that's the end of the slides. Now, we're going to just chat a little about when I went and talked to my cousins. They gave me this thing right here. And I thought, you know, it's a 1849 to 1949, published by senior class of Griffith High School, and it's the senior project. Guess what they did it on? One-room schoolhouse. And I'm like,
Oh,
this is a program all by itself right here. I said, you know, because there's just so much information about these schools. But it starts with Hopewell. I thought, well, okay, I've never really heard much about Hopewell. So we went on a drive. My brother, I took him with me. I said, here, let's go. I took him into the woods to take them pictures of the wall too. I said, in case I fall down, I can't get up. I said, you're my rescuer. So we went to Hopewell Moravian, and there was one car parked there, and I figured that's the secretary. That's who I want to be. Because she'll be able to get, and I know there's history books in that office, and she'll go right to it, boom. And when we went in there, she's like, it took me about 5 minutes to get her open the door. She finally realized,
You weren't going
I'm
away.
harmless. I'm not here to beg you for anything, except information. And she printed me out where 30, 40 years ago, they had done a history on the church. And I had never heard of the man that started that church. The last name didn't ring a bell. It wasn't in any family I had ever researched, so I'm thinking, he snuck up from Davidson County, maybe. I don't, you don't know. I wouldn't go start researching his family. I got enough with mine. But it was 1807, and it was a congregation of German-speaking Lutheran people. Now, that rang a bell in my head because most of my relatives that came here as Lutherans. They didn't come here as Moravians. They didn't, a lot of them, they didn't want nothing to do with that Moravian way at all. Some did and some didn't. And the ones that really didn't ended up going out to Rural Hall and started Nazareth Lutheran Church, and then Shiloh Lutheran Church in Louisville, and my great-grandfather, who was in the Revolutionary War, he's buried back in the woods in their old cemetery back in there, and then you'd never know that graveyard was there unless somebody told you. So, and it's a pretty large cemetery, but there was nothing really about, did this church have a school? Yeah, they did. And, they got started, and you kind of wonder, did they teach English? Because if they're German, they need to learn English, or things aren't going to go well. Even in 1807, and they appointed a Lutheran minister, and he retained his membership in the Moravian Church until he passed away. So he wasn't going to let go, but he would, I'll go help you out, but I'm not giving up what I got there. So there was a lot of good stuff about Hopewell, and I enjoyed talking to that lady. She was really nice. And I flipped the page in Pleasant Fork. Okay, and I'm like, okay, well, this is even more information about Pleasant Fork than I already knew. And the teachers were Clarence Fishel, Joe Montsinger, Frank Nelson, Charles Krause, Walt Nelson, and Sam Sides. Now, if you lived here, most of them names you'll know. You'll know who they are. Sides Nurseries is a big thing, in Forsyth County, and that's that family. He went into the tree growing business.
Was that like a progressive teachers, or they were all there at the same time? Was that kind of a progressive? Who took over after who, or whatever the?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it falls under that, as far as I know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's fine.
So much of this information, anybody could have written anything down they wanted to back then.
Yeah.
And the further up it gets, the more things started to change. And you change a word and it can change the whole story. And so a lot of them, if they weren't Moravians, where they wrote everything down every day. I mean, it was just like, this is who was sick that day. Went back a week later, they're still sick. Went back another week later, we're burying them. I mean, you knew what was coming and how things
Yeah.
were gonna go, and you just kind of went with the flow, and so their information and there's stuff in the Moravian records about Hopewell, and, not a lot. Because I think they started out on the wrong side. And it's kind of like, well, you want to go see them? Well, I mean, you can see them. I think they were just a little out on the fringe of Forsyth County, almost in Davidson County. So, it was kind of odd. But Eden. Okay, this school was built in 1860, and I'm like, okay. I was like, I'd never heard of Eden School at all. And it was a one-room structure built of logs. The small wood stove that stood in the corner was the only heat the students had. The water that supplied the school came from a spring, which was 200 feet just behind it. Okay, it was on Old Lexington Road, a few hundred feet. It had one large room combining both the younger and older groups. And they must have really packed these people into these rooms because they're all so small.
Baxter, how do you spell it?
Eden, E-D-E-N.
Okay.
Just like Eden. Just like
The garden.
Spray
I thought
Breaker
it
and
might be-
Liesel.
E-A-T-O-N.
That became to be the Eden that we know.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't even know that's actually three little towns that came together and changed their name to Eden. But, because I've been up there and been to all three of the little towns. I actually went when Stoneville, when the tornado wiped that poor little town away. It's gone. Every building. That's hard to believe, but that's not that far from here. Okay, Mr. Sam Sides, who still lives half a mile from the site of the old school, he began teaching there in 1882. There was a lady who was going to come today, but her son passed away yesterday. And this is her grandfather.
Oh.
She went to school with my father, so she's like 91 now.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I didn't, I responded to her son passing away with nothing else. I said, I don't expect her.
Yeah.
She's really a sweet lady. I gave her all of my father's Griffith High School books. So, because she does the Griffith thing on Facebook, where she posts when things happen with people. Okay. Some of the students at Eden School were Vera Charles, Mrs. R.C. Moore, M.B. Sides, R.A. Thomas, Annie Evans, Augustus Foltz, Hines, and this is back before, they probably changed it to Haynes, because I've noticed a lot of different spellings of that name, but I'm not really sure. Evermarks, Lambus, Bodenheimer, and Wise. Now, there was an Everhart killed in World War II, and if you go to the Pleasant Fork School, out of all them little, small, mostly Moravian-looking older tombstones, up against the back, you'll see this monument. And it's this guy's grandson actually put that monument there because he didn't come back from the war. So nobody knew what happened to him. So he just put him a monument up. And not the last,
Wow.
but he's on Facebook, and I looked him up, and I told him, I said, people are still paying attention to this stuff.
Good.
And he was, very thankful that, somebody else still listening. Okay, then they talk about Flat Rock. On the 24th day of August, 1817, Samuel, it says Langenauer,
Yeah, he was
Oh.
a brother.
Well,
He was in
I
that
think somebody's
band.
lights were gonna go on. Sold 52 acres of his farmland to Mr. William Everett.
Oh.
Approximately 1840 to 1843, according to according to Mr. F.W. Kimmel, 5 acres of land was sold 3 committee men of the community and their successors. This land now part of Forsyth and then Stokes. Okay. And it just goes on to talk about how, you know, the schools, and if anybody is actually interested in a full copy of this, just let me know. I'll write your name. You can put your name and address down and make it my mail it. I don't mind. When I was looking in another thing about Pleasant Fork, there's a book called From Frontier to Factory by Gwen Stevens Taylor, 1981. And she puts a little article in there about the Pleasant Fork, and it kind of skims over the brush arbor, wandering log, schoolhouse, you know, that burned, and that's it. And this was it in her book, about wandering schoolhouses, really. There wasn't a whole lot in there about them. I was like, well, okay, yeah, I'll move on. And if you ever want, these are actual books that I was getting ready to put in our giveaway stack. And there might be some people who are interested in these. This is the first 200 years. This came out in 1973. It's the history of Friedberg Moravian Church. And I won't go over all the stuff in here about their wandering schoolhouse. It was basically started by Adam Spock. And of course, you talk about that, you know, that should be the next thing out of your mouth, is that's his church. And he started the church. And there's, I think I gave you a copy of this. And I've got everything I need out of it, so there's another. And in here, there's actually, in the diary, there's actually, this thing says, there was a terrible windstorm and half of the roof was blown off the schoolhouse. The fences around the garden and God's acre were ruined, and nearly all the small houses on the place were unroofed. Shingles were scattered in the garden, the yard, and in the woods for half a mile around. It happened all in a minute, probably though a cyclone. I don't know if we have cyclones around. And on account of the terrible roaring, we in the room could not tell what was happening to the house. Some of the windows were blown in, and seeing the children frightened, I began to sing. I won't sing for you. It has the song they were singing.
Oh my goodness.
It's all the little birds are safe in snow, that kind of thing. After talking to them for a little while of the love of the Savior for the children, they ceased to cry, but some of them were so upset that they could not eat their dinner. In the afternoon, a number of brethren came, replaced the garden and graveyard fences, and began to fell trees and low some shingles. And there's a little picture. And I don't know if that's, you know, no, that says June 1894, June 15th picnic in the grave. I love this, picnic in the graveyard.
Oh, yeah.
I don't do graveyard picnics. And there's also a couple, these Home Moravian Church. That was 1914. And it's, I'm just guessing that these are, I have no clue what this Quaggesima. Don't know what that
Oh, I think that's 150th or,
something.
yeah.
And
Centennial.
let me see. Fourth Sunday after Epiphany, February 1st, 1914. So, and those are Home Moravian Church. And that's just more information. And this is the Daniel Cruz book And there's a little information in Friedberg and Friedman in here about, them. And I was looking at books that you could order on eBay. And I really wish somebody around here would have done something like this 40 years ago. Because there were still plenty of them to take pictures of. And it's in Arkansas. And this person went around and, there's a lot of pictures of one-room schoolhouses in this book. And, but it's funny how they all look so different. These people, it's not like a Fortis home. It's just, a lot of effort went into it. In this book, it has information in it from Frontier to Factory, which I read a little out of it. It's an architectural history of Forsyth County, and there's a lot of pictures. Now, this has been redone. I think Feather Hermbach. Did she redo it? It's that really thick. You had to go downtown to the city government building.
Yeah, because I do actually have both of them. The bigger, newer one has a lot more stuff.
A lot more stuff.
Obviously. That one is actually available online.
Yeah, you can
download it off the
Yeah,
internet.
you can download that one. And what is that? I went Spainhour Mill Road, you go up to King, you go on Spainhour Mill Road like you're going to drive straight into Pilot Mountain. You'll come to an immediate 180-degree turn. If you take that left-hand dirt road, it'll take you to, there's a farm. And you can go down there and they have like corn shuckings and
Horn Creek.
Corn Creek. Yeah, they do all kinds of stuff. And they had all these kind of books. This was 30 years ago at least. And I thought, well, the only one I was kind of interested in was 1870 to 1920. And, there's a lot of good information in here, on lots of stuff. And there's even articles, like I said, on one-room schoolhouses. But let me show you the closure. This lady right here, this is Nell Flynn. These were her shoes when she was a child.
Aww, oh, sweet.
And this was her baby dress
Aww.
when she was really young.
How old is that?
Hmm?
How old is that?
Probably, I think we dated this back then when we found this stuff. Wanda Moser. I don't know if you-
Yeah.
That's who, she went to Pine Grove. So she brought all this stuff up there before she moved back to Brevard.
Yeah.
And, she dated this at 1914.
1914.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, 1914.
Aww.
So, all righty, that's all.
I have a question.
Yes.
So back then, there was no Department of Education or anything like that. So am I understanding that most of the schools were set up with the churches, by the churches?
They would either, some were set, some were schools first, and then they became churches, or some were churches that wanted to start a school, and, most of the ones that I looked at in lower Forsyth County were schools first.
So they were just started by the communities?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, the school was needed more than the church.
And do you know, since they were one-room schoolhouses, I've always wondered this, if all ages attended, did they all just learn the same thing?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, they had different classes, My great aunt in the 6th grade was taking Latin. I found her Latin book and I said, what year was you,
Yeah.
I'm glad I was smart enough to ask a lot of questions, because I had these 3 great aunts that all never got married and lived in a house their whole life together. And they're the ones that would give me, you wouldn't believe any pictures on that. And I would ask them, what's this? What's this? What's who? And if I hadn't asked, I would never know.
But basically, the teacher was somebody that the community members found and hired, and there was
You
no actual
actually had to go
certification of,
pass a test.
yeah.
Yes.
And so what that person knew would be all kinds of varieties of things. It wouldn't
Yeah,
necessarily not be all the same as anybody else's.
That might determine what they were taught.
I think this, my dress is not in good shape. This was Nell Flynn's dress when she taught school, I think. I don't even know if I put it in here. No, this one, it's the full-size thing.
Oh, my goodness.
See.
Wow.
And it's
Wow.
funny that, don't they call that velveteen?
That collar.
Velveteen.
Yeah.
Velveteen,
Yeah.
yeah.
My mother made wedding dresses and stuff, and
Mhm.
I'm going by what I think I heard her say. And this
Oh, my
was
goodness.
what she wore when
Oh.
she taught school at Pine Grove. And so, I mean, and thank you, Mrs. Moser, because without her putting tags on everything, I'm like, that was wonderful to open that box and everything, because she used pens and one of them stuck me really good. I don't care, it was a good relationship. But okay. Anyway, yes, ma'am.
Is there a directory for like outside of Forsyth County? Like, I know at one point, like Forsyth was huge, and the one I'm looking for a schoolhouse that was in like Rowan/Iredell County, but close to Forsyth County. Do you know of any
Yeah,
resources that
once
would
once
push
you
me
get
west?
a date, then you
Okay.
can figure out what county it really was.
Yeah, late 1800s.
Because if it's late 1800s, odds are it's Forsyth County if it's here.
Okay,
And because by then the counties are set.
yeah,
What you see now is what it was in the late 1800s.
okay.
I don't think there were any other changes around here that were. It was Davie and Yadkin and Surrey and Stokes and Forsyth, the divisions that already happened.
Okay,
And
But those other counties do actually have libraries with North Carolina roots in them,
Okay.
where they would have their own local history
okay,
ready to
Yeah.
find.
okay.
if you kind of have an idea as to where it was,
Yeah, it was what I run into is it was a black school. And so the history for black schools was not written as predominantly as it was for white schools.
it's actually, if you go into the library and go on to their ancestry and genealogy
Yeah,
stuff, and scroll down, you'll come to a Western Sentinel
Okay.
newspaper, and type in black schools and put a date,
okay,
because there are articles in there
okay,
about these black schools.
okay.
There's a memorial, something of, if you drive up Highway 8, what is that called, Memorial something school? It was a black school, and a lot of people that ended up there lived there.
Okay.
They actually lived at that school,
Yeah,
because it kind of was like a boarding-ish kind of school. But there is a lot of information on
okay.
black
It's,
schools.
what I learned is that I guess my like 2 times great grandparents paid the taxes for it. So we're trying to figure out just like, what was the school? Why did they pay the taxes
Why did they
for it?
pay the
Like, what was
taxes?
it? Like, what was
Yeah.
it about? And then it burned. So my dad remembers kind of seeing some of the remnants of it, but we've been trying to track down this little black church
But yeah,
/ school.
yeah, and if it's a church, then you kind of figure out the area and see what newspaper did reporting in that area.
Oh,
And-
fire.
And you might have to look a little bit, but you can hunt down it'd be good if you had a date, but nobody, those are 1 in a million shots usually to have that date. Somebody, that happened June 3rd, 1919. That's happened to me 3 times out of 400,000 things I've tried to find.
If this sounds like it's too early, but if it's a Rosenfeld school, North Carolina did a survey and did some serious work to record Rosenfeld schools built in this state. I got interested in that for an
Yeah.
architectural reason. And I was looking at Tennessee and they'd done nothing. But North Carolina had done some serious work
Sounds,
Yeah.
in
That was mostly
recording.
in the thirties, right?
No, well, it starts in the 20s and then goes into the 30s. So this one sounds
Yeah.
like it's too early, but
I wonder when that's.
the state historical people may have done some other things. I don't know, but I
Yeah.
do know they have done a really good job with the Rosenfeld schools.
But yeah, if you type, even try the word schools in that Western Sentinel newspaper, and, there'll be a lot of articles, they're short, they're not long. They're this long, I mean, there's this, and usually if you put in the word black, because that's the word they used back then, that's what'll come up, and it'll highlight in yellow that word, which is really helpful, because that way I could go straight to Hamburg School every time I read an article, and it would always be, you could just see the school slowly slipping away.
Baxter, when did Forsyth County or Winston-Salem establish serious public schools? I'm not from around.
Usually it's around, they started talking heavily in 1920, it seems like, and figuring out where we're going to build them. Downtown was a different story. 1900, they built the city high school where my grandfather lived. But of course, they built Reynolds High School 20 years later. And how convenient is it that that school burned down right before the Reynolds High School opened up? I'm like, that wasn't
That's a great story.
yeah, I'm like, I don't think that was an accident. But yeah, but I was, I don't know how many of you, when I talked about the book I found, in my parents' basement. That was the grandfather who worked for Reynolds and made beeswax for New Philadelphia Moravian Church. And then my grandmother came up, they had like 400 beehives up in the mountains with a doctor and a lawyer. He was just way too active. That's what killed him by the time he was 47 years old. He just never stopped. He couldn't be still, they said. He just constantly was doing stuff and had a goat's milk farm and worked third shift at Reynolds and was foreman of Factory 256. That's the one that burned down in 1996. But they were remodeling and going to do all this stuff right beside the city government center, that new building. But there's just so much stuff, that, yes.
So who typically owns these one-room schoolhouses that are boarded up or just still standing?
Anything boarded up, somebody's paying taxes on it.
So,
If it's in Forsyth County.
so you'd have to look at tax records.
And there are a lot of remodeled schools. You can go see. There's one off of Shadowline. And there's a sign that points where you turn right there at that church. And it was moved there. And then what's the other one that they've redone? There's two that are really nice that they've really put a lot of money into.
The Red Bank one.
And Red Bank's way up there.
Yeah, but that's moved there, but
This
very
sounds like
nice.
Oak Ridge or something. I can't remember.
Seems like there is one kind of eastern Forsyth County that's,
Yeah.
and you can take tours of it
It popped up,
occasionally.
when I would Google one-room schoolhouses in Forsyth County. And I'm like, well, I want old dilapidated stuff. I said, I don't really want to talk about brand newish, remodeled, moved over here kind of things. Even though that's good, but they always move them. I'm like, can't leave it at the same spot. So,
Is there any push to get any of these that are still standing historically protected? No,
no.
no.
Not the ones, people I talk to. And there aren't that many that are still standing.
Yeah.
That hasn't been already taken care of and have a designation No. Yeah.
Like when they had, you're talking about the little ones that they would close and combine and, you know, the kids would have to travel. Now, according to my dad, you know, you had to walk 10 miles to school in the snow with holes in your shoes, you know, to get to school. But how did these kids, I mean, when they were out there, you know, that they had little, you know, the schools they were going to, and if they were closing and consolidating, how did they get educated?
Walk. My father's brother, who was 4 years older than him, was a bus driver. He wouldn't get up an extra half hour to ride the bus. He would sleep that extra half hour and walk to school.
Oh, my goodness.
How long did it take you?
He went from, if you remember where Thunderbird Drive-In Theater was, on South Main Street, if you remember where South Main Street is, from there to Griffith High School on Clemson Road.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my.
And I don't know if he had a shortcut through the woods or what. But to sleep that 30 extra minutes, and I said, yeah, you had. I said,
Oh.
I can't sleep like that. I have a hard enough time just going to sleep at home.
One thing that's interesting, I know in our journals, we have published some things in the Winston-Salem Journal about 1914, 1916, about one-room schoolhouses. You all can go back and read those, but, and they were articles submitted by teachers in these schools. But something that we don't realize how agrarian agriculture in the county was where these schools were. And school only ran from like November till February, through February. Because they had to start crops
Harvest time, they had to
in
shut
March,
down.
and then
4 to
they
6
were
months
harvesting,
is
yeah.
as much
Oh, my
school as they got.
goodness.
In the first schools, you graduated at grade 10. My grandmother graduated from Louisville School
Yeah,
in the early 1900s, and it was only 10 grades. And then I think when they consolidated and moved forward, they were 11 grades. And then, of course, by the time we come along, after the war,
we'll make y'all live
12
here.
grades. But in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were only 10 grades to graduate
Yeah.
from our local schools here in the county. And yeah, they went from November through February, and that was school.
In Clemens, the boarding school, it opened in 1900, and then it closed 20 years later because they built Clemens School.
Okay.
And it was kind of a special farming
It put that
education
business-
school.
And it was for people to learn, a little more, not uppity, but higher education things. It wasn't basic public school education. You paid a lot.
And the Moravian Church kind of had a
I don't know
hand.
where my great aunts and them got money to go do something like that, but she ended up working at Reynolds her whole. They all three worked at Haynes, and they quickly found out Haynes don't pay you anything.
Oh.
So they all jumped over to Reynolds because they paid a lot.
Oh.
And I'm like, they gave you stock,
Yeah.
but they never spent anything. They made their own clothes.
Mhm.
The oldest one was in 2006. She was 103. She never bought a dress. I can see them in their sewing making dresses right now.
Where did they live? You said they lived together. Where?
All three of them lived, if you know where the Barn Antiques is on Country Club Road, it used to be D-Rose. If you look straight behind it, there's a tin roof house. That was my great uncle's house. To the left of it, if you look down in the hole, that's where my parents lived after we moved off of South Main. To the left of it, that's the house they all lived in. There were 5 women and 5 men in that family. Only 2 men out of the 5 got married, and only 1 of the women.
Oh, my goodness.
That's unusual.
Well, it kept the family small. Doing their genealogy was wonderful. I said, it didn't take no time at all to get them that way. My father had 15 aunts and 5 uncles.
Oh.
And I'm like, I'll do them and some of their kids, but they've already got great-grandchildren in that group.
Yeah.
I said, no, good luck. Y'all have a good time, but I'm done with you. that was enough of that. Okay, anything else?
I was just going to mention, you were talking earlier about some names that had gone in the area and so forth. When we opened Meadowlark, just down the road, people don't know why some of those names, I recognize student names.
Oh, yeah.
Those people are just still
Oh,
around
yeah.
here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the Beecham family, Derek, some of his family, where they just sold and built all those houses and, you know, they were kind of up on that Beecham Road a little bit. There was a house. The rest of that was,
Bowman
people
Gray.
related to the rentals.
Bowman Gray,
Bowman Gray.
on Brookberry Farm.
Yeah, because he was good friends with my grandfather. I've got a Christmas card they sent, and it's got all of them but the youngest son in the Christmas card, wearing their little sailor uniforms. But they destroyed that neighborhood.
Just curious, the Methodist Children's Home on Renolda Road, I would assume, I know that some of the kids there went to rentals, you know, later in later years.
Oh, yeah.
But I was wondering, I imagine they probably had a one room, they're old enough, they were there long enough, they probably had a schoolhouse there originally.
Right off the bat, it was Oak Ridge Military Academy. It was not Children's Home.
Or
So-
Davis.
That's
Davis
right.
Davis
That's right.
Academy.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, all the way in Greensboro. Like that, too much stuff up here.
That's right.
Boarding
School for boys, yeah.
It's a military academy.
Yeah.
And there are maps of that academy where everything was. And I'm sure that they left a lot of those buildings when they said, hey, we're done. And the Methodists actually started those children's homes in Asheville. And then the Baptists started doing them. So there were a lot of them, sort of popping up all over the place. But they started out as unwed mothers' homes. The one here led a little bit more toward children, period. They weren't that big in the unwed mother thing here. But you went up in the mountains, it's like everybody's sent their unwed daughter up there. Nobody's there. You'll never know. And I've actually got a woman right now who gave me a picture of a baby, and her daughter, that was her daughter's child. The mother dies when she's 40, but she had the baby up there in the Baptist home, and she's trying to find out where is this child now. I'm like, no, you're in North Carolina. The records are permanently sealed with super glue. I said, if it would have happened in South Carolina, when the child turns 18, they can go looking for you. But they'll never know you're looking for them. Which I hate it because she's like 84, 85 years old. I've dug up as much information as I can for her.
Just trying to DNA test?
Everything. They've done it all. No.
That's sad.
No. But see, they don't know if the people that pop up are even the ones they're looking for. She did that. She did the ancestry. She didn't do the 23andMe, which it's looking like might have been a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I've already closed out my 23andMe account, and if I was anybody else, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I would do the same thing. I mean, they're saying one thing, and then they say another thing, and I'm like, okay, can't make up your mind. You know, I already found out what I want to do. Don't eat asparagus. You know, I mean, that was really the big thing. Health-wise, I had nothing. Zero. None of that Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Zero. And my family doesn't have those things. They just get old and get heart disease and all that kind of stuff from eating too many, hot dogs. Hot dogs. My father ate hot dogs all the time. But he made it to 88. So that's not bad. All right.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks, Max.